There you go.
Alright, so I'm going to be refuting the claim that the U.S. will undoubtedly go to war with Iran in the next 2 years. Two secondary claims that I'll be addressing are that Iran is using enriched uranium to make bombs, and that the U.S. has given Israel nuclear bombs in the event that Iran attacks them. According to the LA Times, Iran has uranium enriched up to 20% in February 2010, and which they claim is for peaceful purposes. Although most of it is stockpiled in lower levels, it is known that uranium at 90% enriched is used for bombs. My argument against that is that due to the non-proliferation treaty, there have been a lot of disarmament lately, and that's creating 90% enriched uranium available for countries to buy to dilute down to safer levels for use in energy. This shows that there is a discrepancy in the evidence used by the advocate, because when looking at sources, I was unable to find any that gave a reliable source that said the stockpile of 90% of uranium enriched over 90% was in Iran's presence. The second claim that I'm going to refute is that the U.S. has given nuclear bombs to Israel. The U.S. is a part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is basically a treaty with almost all of the countries in the world, whose goal is to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and nuclear warfare. Iran is currently in that treaty, but as of late they've been considered to not be following it. There are also 3 other countries, India, Pakistan, and North Korea, that are not in the treaty and are not following the treaty guidelines. But so now that you know what the treaty is, it would show that the U.S. would not be able to give arms to Israel, because that would, them being one of the main founders of the treaty, it would go completely against what it stands for. Also, the Federation of American Scientists reports that in October of 1957, Israel and France had cut a deal where France would be giving a nuclear reactor to Israel for them to develop nuclear energy. Therefore, they would have their own nuclear weapons that they've created without the help of the United States. Because of this, the assumption that the U.S. has given Israel nuclear bombs takes away from the reasoning of the advocate, because it cannot be true. Thank you.
All right, well, I think you're responding to the secondary claims and don't really respond to the main proposition at all. The arguments, if the secondary claims don't lead to the main proposition, you need to make that argument and say that you can't reach the conclusion that we're going to go to war because of the amount of enriched uranium or whether or not the United States has provided nuclear weapons to Israel. I think that you need to explain that that's an inference that the advocate's making and that it's an unreasonable inference to make and you can't reach that particular conclusion. But mostly you ignore what the main proposition is and focus on the secondary issues. Now the secondary issues, if they weren't all that involved with the main claim from the advocate's point of view, they feel even more detached from your point of view. The notion that uranium that has been used in other parts of the world might be depleted or reduced, diluted to be used in peaceful applications in some place in the world. That's an interesting idea, but I don't think that anybody says that's what's going on in Iran, so I'm not sure why that argument is being applied there. There's a very thin press about whether or not the Iranians are actually possessing any of this, and I'm not sure that that gets you very far. I think that this argument is not very well developed, and I'm not sure that it helps the advocate's position much, and I'm not sure that your response to it undermines the advocate's position here. So I think there needs to be a little bit more analysis on that particular point. We run into some of the same issues with the U.S. Giving nukes to Israel. I think that you have a very good explanation about why it's unlikely that the U.S. would have done so. So your reasoning there is explained, and we can follow that pretty easily. The notion that Israel has nukes, you kind of give another explanation about how they might have acquired nukes. I'm not sure how important that was. I think there's probably a simpler way to demonstrate that they have nukes. But again, the issue comes back. So how does the presence of nuclear weapons in Israel affect whether or not the United States is going to go to war with Iran in the next 2 years? And I think that, that's a good question that you ought to be asking. Let's assume that the advocate is correct on this position. How does that advance that claim? I don't understand what the warrant is on this particular conclusion. And you shouldn't just assume that because the advocate's got a claim here that their claim is automatically supporting the main proposition. You need to look at the relationship between those points and the main proposition. And I don't think that you do that very effectively here. But you do signpost your responses to the advocate's claim. And like I said on the second point, I thought you had some good reasoning explaining why their conclusion is probably not a valid one. All right, thank you.